Hi, welcome to episode 102 of Talk About the Passion. I'm your host, Christian Campagna, and my guest today is Brian Fair, singer for the band Shadows Fall. In this episode, we talk about the formation of that band, his band before that, Overcast, going to the Grammys, as well as our mutual love for the band Into Another, as well as the Grateful Dead and Phish. I've brought those last two bands up on this podcast before here and there, but this is the first time I got to nerd out with another fan about Phish, so I apologize in advance for that. If that's not your thing. But hey, that's all at the end of the episode, so. This was my first time meeting Brian. Like a lot of guests on here, we follow each other on social media, but had never met in person or in this capacity. He's a great storyteller, and from this conversation, him as well as his band, Shadows Fall, he's a hardworking guy, and the success his band has achieved shows that. They've done some amazing tours. He talks about playing with King Diamond, some of the Ozfest with Ozzy and Sabbath and that kind of thing. And there's some crazy stories in there. As you may know, this podcast is also available on YouTube now. This one is now available as a video interview and has all sorts of fancy graphics throughout. And you get to see our wonderful faces, so check that out if that's your kind of thing. Just search Talk About the Passion podcast on YouTube and you should find it. I'm also on Instagram as Talk About the Passion podcast, as well as my personal one, Caffeine and Cookies, all one word. And I generally use that one much more. With that said, thanks for listening, and here we go with Brian Fair. All right, well, I'm here with Brian Fair. Thanks for coming on tonight, man. I appreciate it.
Indeed, man. Good to talk to you.
Yeah. We have I think we have a lot of mutual friends. You're friends with Buzz, who's a good friend of mine. And so we have Zach Wells.
The incestual Boston hardcore metal scene, for sure.
Yeah, of course.
We all came out of the same primordial ooze,
Yeah, I know. When you look at some of the bands and the members and how they're connected and just all over the scene up here is it's definitely pretty incestuous.
100%, totally, man. The flow chart's hilarious. Yeah. And even when you go back to the early days, it was like that at first too. So it's funny.
Yeah, like even like the real early like DC, like Minor Threat and those bands were all shared members, and so it's pretty crazy.
Well, when the scene's that small, like everyone has to start a band, and that's what's funny. I always love when people see old flyers of like. It'll be like Overcast, Converge, Cave In. That must have been insane. I'm like, dude, it was in a barn in North Andover. I remember.
Upton. I think they used to have shows in Upton.
The Upton Grange, man. Yeah.
So normally when I do these, I like to obviously research a little on the person, and so I'm not talking out of my ass. So I went on Wikipedia, which can sometimes be, who knows what's on there. But the first thing on there mentions in 7th grade, you had a visit to a recording studio.
Sponsored
by Mass Electric.
The Mass Electric slogan contest. Yes, indeed, man.
And it says a Beastie Boys inspired tune.
Yeah, basically they had some contest where you could record like a jingle. So me and two of my friends, Eric Benson and Jason Williams, we had a keyboard, like a little Casio keyboard, and just played like beat number 4 or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And then and on every fourth measure would hit the fill button. So it had a very what was that? The Paul Revere by the Beastie Boys vibe to it. Where we all traded off verses, kind of.
Yeah.
And like it was about conserving energy. So it was all like about turning off the lights when you leave a room, or energy loss will be our doom, and all these classic lines. But we won. Like we did it on like a little boombox recording cassette, and I think everyone else just kind of like wrote stuff down. So I think we just won just because we were actually recorded it. And then they sent us like a legit studio, and we plug in our little like $50 Casio keyboard into this like crazy Neve soundboard, like. That was great. So that was my first taste of actual recording studio experience.
Yeah. Can we hear? Is that tape available in the world?
I wish I could find it. I bet Benson might have it somewhere. I had a
Yeah,
cassette of it for like ever,
yeah,
but it's somewhere along the lines as the boxes transferred over the
right.
years.
Yeah,
Lost. There was a picture of us too where we're all, trying to do like a b-boy stance in
yeah. The
front of the
crossed arms.
mics. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Like it's hilarious, man. So yeah, so that's what got the bug in me.
yeah. Yeah, there's a video of me from high school. They had a lip sync contest, and I graduated in '87, and we did the Beastie Boys. I was MCA because I had a little bit of
Nice.
facial hair, but we
There
did
you
Rhymin' and Stealing, and but there's a video of that. I've never seen it, so I kind of would probably be pretty cringy, but I
Yeah,
imagine
that's
there's a
that's
lot
what's
of arm crossing.
I'm sure. I'm sure. That's what it's like. You look back like, oh, I wish we had that. Then you're like, do we? No,
I
do we wish we
know,
had that?
I
Now
know.
you kids can't get away with anything embarrassing, man. It's
Yeah,
gonna live on YouTube and
I know,
Instagram for the rest of your life, man.
I know.
So
But on the other side of that too is like when you look back as coming from the hardcore scene and just the DIY world, um, doing that early was that was always fun, just being creative like that, like
oh,
how
100%, man. I remember I started. Me and my friends in my neighborhood, we would just do like lip sync like shows for like the parents where we were
yeah.
just fake playing along the stuff and just going crazy. And then me and my friends started doing boombox recordings like super early.
Hmm.
And I remember one of the, I guess I didn't realize at the time, but I was in like an experimental noise core band because we didn't know how to play yet, but I had a guitar. So I just would turn the distortion up and I'd hit it with drumsticks while my friend screamed. And I'm like, man, we should have toured Japan. We would have been huge.
I know, right? Yeah, like late '90s, like noise band.
Totally, man. But we didn't know. Yeah, at the time, we were just like a bunch of fourth and fifth graders, just like making noise and recording it. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's what started the DIY ethic.
yeah. And so you're from Milford, Mass, which for anyone that doesn't know, that's I guess what's that, an hour west of
Yeah,
Boston?
about 40 minutes less. But I always say it's 40 minutes from everywhere. We were 40
Yeah,
minutes from Boston, 40 minutes from Worcester, 40 minutes from Providence.
yeah,
So it's funny. It actually became like a drug mule central because of that.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I was born in Framingham actually, which is a little bit closer
yeah,
to Boston, and then we moved to Milford when I was pretty young. My
yeah.
parents were teachers in Framingham, so they didn't
Oh,
want
all
to
right.
teach in the same town we were in school in
Yeah,
because they
of
were just
course.
like they already saw the problems
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah, I work
So
in front of
yeah, oh really? Yeah.
you.
So
Yeah.
they that's where I was born. That's where my family like has deep Framingham roots. But
Okay.
then we moved to Milford and yeah, and then I lived there pretty much until I went to Boston University, and from there I moved into Boston proper for like the next however long until I moved to St. Louis.
Yeah. And so how does music find you in Milford? Like how young?
Uh,
Is it in
yeah,
your house?
yeah. My dad was always like super 50s oldies doo wop kind of guy, and always singing, always playing music. Um, and I happened to get into Kiss and Aerosmith pretty early on. I think I had a neighbor who was like, probably like 5 years older than me, who was already playing guitar, and he turned me on to Kiss and all that. And I went and bought like all the vinyl. Although actually, the first two records I ever bought of my own money were Men at Work, Business as Usual, and Ozzy's Blizzard of Oz on the
Oh,
same day.
nice.
Like I
There
bought
you
those
go.
two together.
Yeah.
So, and which is funny, both still in the collection that are
Oh,
right
really?
over there. Like the
The
OG ones
original ones? Yeah.
survived.
Oh,
The
nice.
original ones I bought, yeah, which
That's
is
awesome.
funny.
Yeah.
But so I got into like just kind of rock at first, the arena rock, and
Hmm.
from there that led to some of the kind of I guess hairband kind of stuff, and I started going to arena shows super young.
Yeah.
Like I saw like Bon Jovi Slippery When Wet tour with Cinderella opening up on the Night Songs album.
Nice.
It's one of the first arena shows I saw, and I came in and I saw Tom Kiefer on stage, and they opened with the song Night Songs, which
Oh,
is
nice.
just slow
Yeah.
and heavy
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like dirt. And I just looked at him. I was like, that's all I want to do. I was like, that looks like the best thing ever.
Yeah, I know. The
So
doomiest of the Cinderella songs.
totally. It's funny. My band I jam with here in St. Louis, Hell Night, we covered that and made it like sludge,
That's awesome.
tuned down to like Z and super
Right.
slow. And,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, yeah.
so, but so that's kind of where it began. I got into just kind of that, all the classics, Ozzy and Kiss and Aerosmith and Guns N' Roses. Got to see the Guns N' Roses open for Aerosmith on the Appetite tour, and that
Oh,
was
nice.
killer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually, I started then kind of through skateboarding, getting into like, Sex Pistols, Black Flag, all the logo bands, like all the T-shirt bands that were in the back of the ads.
Oh yeah.
And I remember getting Circle Jerks, Group Sex, and like hiding it from my parents and shit just because of the name of it.
Yeah, of course.
And Suicidal Tendencies' first one, but didn't really know that scene like existed that was tangible. Like to me, it was just like bands in the back of Thrasher magazine. And I ended up actually meeting Mike D, who I was in Overcast with, who's now in Killswitch Engage, skateboarding at a friend's ramp. And he was like talking to me about he's like, oh, you're into like, some of these, I think I was wearing a Circle Jerk shirt. And he's like, oh, I'm going to see this band Leeway at the Channel in Boston this weekend. You should go. And I was like, I read about Leeway's Enforcer demo, like in Thrasher, and was like, yeah, totally. I've been to tons of shows. Yeah, that'd be awesome. And like, no idea what I was getting into. And that show, I think it was Leeway, Breakdown, Only the Witness, and Said and Done, I think.
Yeah, it was.
And it was
91.
About 90, 91. And I was fucking blown away. I was like, compared to the arena rock vibe of all that, it was so different. Yeah. And next thing you know, I'm like, I'm the 14-year-old kid stage diving off the, grabbing onto the thing at the Channel and swinging in the crowd and going nuts. And that was it. After that, it was every weekend. Like every weekend, either suburban shows or Boston shows or something. Yeah. And then I realized in our area there were so many bands that I didn't know existed. Yeah. Like there was this whole Hopedale Holliston crew of like Kingpin and Arise and Endless and all these bands. I was like, how was this in my backyard? I didn't even know. And that was it. So
yeah. Once you get that key to the door, and it's funny. A theme on this podcast has been Kiss and skateboarding.
Yeah.
Like
there you go. I mean, those are the two gateway drugs right there. You know?
Yeah, definitely. And then so you start Overcast in 91.
Yeah, so pretty much right after that show, we started talking about stuff. And at the time, I'd been playing in a band called Frenzy that was more like Sex Pistols meets Skid Row kind of like stuff. We were sleazy-ish, but we thought we were punk rock. And it's great though. Being sleazy, our guitar player is writing all these lyrics about like sleazy sex stuff. Where I'm like, he was a virgin until he probably graduated college.
Right. Yeah.
So, but all he knew about that was like from lyrics of like like Warrant records and shit. And Kiss. Yeah. So, so we started talking, and I played bass, and he played bass, and he's like, "Well, I already got all these songs," so he's like, "So you have to sing." I was like, "Okay," And I think the first Overcast practice, it was just drums, bass, and vocals. I grabbed the drummer for Frenzy, Jason, who was the best drummer I knew, and we just jammed on some songs that Mike had written from his old band, Nice Try. That that it was very primitive-y, Cro-Mags-y kind of like moshy stuff, like a little more like New York hardcore influence than what Overcast became. Yeah. And I didn't even know what I was going to sound like. I was probably doing like a James Hetfield thing, just by default. Right. And then things just kind of progressed from there. But yeah, we of course we found the local metalhead guitar player, who could actually play, like circles around all of us. Yeah, and plus he had a Nuclear Assault shirt, and we're like, all right, you're in the band, So a mullet and a Nuclear Assault shirt and guitar. That's all you needed. You were in.
I know. Every band seemed to have one of those, like in the early '90s. It was like hardcore kids, and then that one like Hesher dude that was good.
Well, because they could actually play. They could down pick and they could palm mute. And, we're like the rest of us were like we were faking that we knew what we were doing, but we you got the attitude, and then you needed that one metal dude who could actually make us sound like a real band. Yeah. And then of course, then they hear like Judge and Cro-Mags, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can get into this. So, and then you got to convince them to cut their hair at some point.
Right. Yeah, and so you guys were sort of considered one of the first metalcore bands. What do you think of that term as a genre?
It's kind of funny because to me, metalcore meant like bands like Zero Tolerance from Buffalo and like Integrity. Bands
Marauder and stuff.
Yeah, Marauder. Totally. Like to me, it was that like the guitars had the metallic, crunchy, thrashy sound, and there might be a couple solos here and there. Yeah. But so to me, that's what metalcore was. And then what Overcast was doing, I definitely considered combining. We had just as many Slayer ripoff riffs as we did Judge ripoff riffs. So we were definitely combining metal and hardcore, and we were getting really into like the early Florida death metal stuff, Morbid Angel and Deicide and stuff. So that was creeping into our sound. And plus Pete being a metalhead guitar player just had that feel to it. But forever, Jason didn't have a double kick pedal. He would try and fake it with one. Then once he got a double kick pedal, it was all right, all bets are off. We're a metalcore band now.
Yeah.
It's funny though that now like metalcore almost means like poppy punk choruses with like breakdowns. So it's funny what it became. Yeah. To me, it'll always be like Leeway, Integrity, Chromags, like that type of stuff. So, but we didn't at the time. We didn't care. Like metalcore, we thought summed us up pretty well. Yeah. But it also seems to pull in bands like, Bloodlet, who are doing more like sludgy stuff and like, even things like that. So that's what we kind of thought it was. So, and it's funny though, because, Shadows Fall definitely got lumped into that new wave of metalcore stuff. And we're like, dude, we're a fucking metal band. Like, I mean, we got a few mosh parts, but like, I mean, we're pretty
at the
metal.
End of the day, you're a metal band.
We were pretty metal,
Yeah. That seemed to happen with emo too. That genre was something completely different. Like when
I'm wearing an Endpoint shirt, man. Endpoint
exactly.
and the Endpoint split lip. Like to me, that's emo. And then like the later screamo-y stuff to me is like Heroin and like bands like that, Lincoln, and like all that stuff. Whereas once people started calling like this newer emo stuff, I'm like, dude, this is like radio pop, punk rock. I'm like, wait. It's like, nah, man, emo is like, Rites of Spring and Failure and shit, like, it's like, come on, man, So, it's just fun, but that shows you how, like just generationally how different it is, So, because I would even be like, I used to love emo core, but I'm thinking like Endpoint, Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Elliot, do you remember that band?
Oh, totally. All that stuff, and it's funny because those bands would all play together back then where we were on a lot of bills where we may be super heavier than some of the other bands, but it didn't matter. It was all the same scene. Yeah. Everyone played together. Those mixed bills weren't considered mixed bills. That was just a hardcore show. Yeah. All bets were off,
Yeah. And what was I going to say? Moving forward, were you listening to like different like sort of like that Bloodlet and those sort of heavier bands that were like sort of a different, almost like post-hardcore, I guess.
Totally, man. I love Bloodlet. Dissolve from Poughkeepsie was another one of those bands that was like doing down-tuned, like super sludgy, slow stuff. Yeah. Loved all that stuff. And me and Mike were huge I Hate God fans in the Overcast days. Yeah. And we would try and do, like, the only way we just didn't have that. We weren't from the swamp, our way of doing it was just playing things super slow, like live, but all that stuff definitely was in the mix. And just, we were anything that like at that time was kind of pushing the genre in a new direction. Yeah. We were into, because we didn't exactly fit in any one of the kind of smaller parts of the scene. Like Overcast was always a band that didn't have a home in a lot of scenes, and we liked that. We didn't mind that, because we would play with straight edge bands like that were doing like Youth Crew stuff. Like we did a tour with Mouthpiece. And then we would also, but then we get to play with, we played with At the Gates, we played with Deicide. We would play the death metal shows too. So we loved kind of being in between all that stuff and playing with bands that were at least trying to do something interesting and exciting. So
that's the stuff I think that excites me, and it's always been, like I saw you have an Into Another shirt on stage in one of your
Into Another were the band that like they kind of like showed all of us like, dude, all bets are off. Like you can do whatever you want, man. It's like if it's good, it doesn't matter. I remember Mike D saw them when they did that POWMIA show at the channel, and was like, he just came home and was like, dude, everything's different now. Everything's different now. You got to hear this. Yeah. And I loved the first record, but then Ignore Us came out, and I was like, this is a masterpiece. Like not a wasted note. Everything in its perfect place. Just incredible. So
I get chills. I get chills when I hear the little bass solo and Anxious.
Man.
That song is
so good, man. Even the ballads would get me, man. And it was funny is I remember those early Into Another shows, especially in Boston. were hard. Like people danced hard to to another back then.
Yeah.
It was funny because they'd be singing about like snowflakes and people are just swinging fists.
I know,
Like it was awesome. So great.
Yeah, I think I saw that first show and I wasn't feeling it. And all my buddies were
Yeah.
like, dude, these guys are great. And then when I heard the record and saw them again, I was like, all right, I'm down for
Yeah, it
this.
makes it. Well, because at first you're like, oh, it's Richie from Underdog, Youth and Stay. Here we go, and you're like, what? What is happening?
This? Yeah.
What is he? Is he singing opera? Like, what is going on?
Yeah. And
So like crazy. Yeah.
Underlord and
Totally, man. Totally. It's
he's
crazy,
a great lyricist too.
Oh, incredible! Guy has such a way with words. So and everything's he's feeling it. Like like there's no pretension there. It's all it's all coming from the heart for sure.
And you studied writing in college?
Yeah, well, I ended up being a literature major. I was originally photojournalism, and the first few things we had to do were like 5 a.m. like court reports, where we're like going to the courthouse at 5 a.m. and deadlines. And I was like, you know what? This isn't exactly, I wanted to just write for Rolling Stone and like whatever.
Right.
So I switched over to literature because I just loved reading and all that. So, and I ended up with a degree in modern literature with a concentration in photojournalism.
Nice.
So from Boston University. So, but I was also taking a lot of philosophy and theology classes while I was there too.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I just kind of put a post up about this where like I didn't realize at the time like how chronological and biographical some of my lyrics are, and I can look back and tell you exactly what I was reading.
I was just gonna say
what class inspired like this song.
Right. Okay.
I was there was a Overcast song, "Scar the Mind," and I'm like, man, this is just T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, like just just like totally like redesigned and ripped off. Or I'll be like, oh, this one's like you can tell I was like studying transcendental meditation at the time when this was written. It's pretty funny.
That's
funny
nice.
To see. So,
yeah. That's what I was going to ask, if how much of an influence that literature's had on your writing.
Huge, especially in those days. And when I was kind of still learning about just how the world worked and just young and excited about like everything. That was a big part of it. These days, lyrics have probably been a little more reflective and personal and like, coming from an internal place.
Yeah.
A lot of those early ones were definitely inspired by external influence.
Stories and
stories that I heard, philosophical ideas that I just kind of expand upon or even just, psychedelic experimentations and things like that as well,
Right.
So, definitely. But that was a big influence on those back in the day. And because it's funny, Mike wrote a lot of the early lyrics, and they're definitely like coming from a very heartbroken and tortured place. And then you see the shift to this like philosophical, spiritual side, and you're like, you can tell I took over.
That's funny. And so Shadows Fall. When does that start?
It's funny because they started in '96, and Overcast took them on some of their first like out of state tours and tours. Right. Long weekends and shows and stuff. Yeah. And I remember at the time I had known those guys from some of their other bands from before Shadows Fall. Like Paul was in Push Button Warfare and Bloodbath and a few other bands from Western Mass. And Matt was playing in a death metal band that used to play around. And so I was already friends with most of those guys. And then when Overcast broke up, I didn't know what I was going to do. Like I had been in that band at that point for like 8 years. I was in my early 20s. So I'm like, this was like a third of my life was in this band at that point. Yeah. And we played our last show in Connecticut at the Tune-In, and Matt from Shadows Fall was literally waiting as I got off stage and be like, hey, man, I think Phil's leaving the band. If you want to sing, I'm like, dude, at least let me put on a dry shirt and like let the feedback die from the, the last show of this band, Yeah. But I kept it in mind, and then he sent me a couple instrumental demos of the new stuff and where it was heading. Yeah. Their early stuff was like a lot of like 7-8 minute long songs that were a lot of death metal stuff, and it was cool, and I loved a lot of the riffs. But the new stuff they sent me had a little more of a thrash metal vibe to it. So getting a little bit better, tighter songwriting, and I was like, man, this I can get into. Yeah. And we started jamming, and man, before I knew it, it was such a fast thing. Like I joined the band officially in like December of '98, I think, and by spring of '99, we were already signed to Century Media, working on a new record, and had two full U.S. tours booked. And I'm like,
That's
what
awesome.
just happened? You know, like,
yeah.
you know, and that was also the time where, you know, you didn't think of like success in a way of like, oh, we can do this for a living. It was like, oh man, we're going to put out a record and we can tour a little bit. This will be awesome. But then things just escalated fast, man.
Yeah. And that's, I feel like that kind of stuff is like like success, just creating music, getting together with people is, you know, that's succeeding right there, you know. And then
100%, like having a physical copy of the music you created was just the coolest thing back then, because it was a lot harder to do back then as well, you know, like that. And even just getting into a legit studio and all that, and just having your ideas fully realized was such a cool thing. But then it did, you know, it would definitely became like, holy shit, we could live off of this, make a living. And then things really took off like 5 years later from there. It was crazy.
Yeah. You guys did some pretty huge tours.
It got nuts. But what's funny is our first full, the first kind of extended thing we did, we went out with All Out War and God Forbid on like a 2-week tour. And then from there, we did a full U.S. tour that was called, I think it was like the International Extreme Music Tour. It was Dismember from Sweden, Christian from Brazil, Cataclysm from Canada, and who else? Oh, that might have been it. And then us. Yeah. So, and on that bill, we were without a doubt the softest of all the bands, you know, right. Like we had clean guitar parts and and clean vocals and you know, and these dudes were just crushing. So, but we had a blast on that tour. The crowds were great. And then the next tour after that was with King Diamond. We went right into a King Diamond tour.
That's great.
What was that like? Incredible. It was awesome, but like the King was not like very huge in the States at the time. Like it was at a weird time. It was the House of God record, and which is an awesome record, but was like now, you know, I see these King Diamond tours now, and they're huge theaters, and he's got all the
he's
production.
Had a huge,
So we were playing like 200 cap clubs with him, where he couldn't even bring in the candelabras. You know,
that's crazy.
And there was a few bigger shows. Like there was a couple that were bigger. Like Texas was big, LA was big, but the first night was at the Key Club in LA, and I remember we walk in and their band's up there sound checking, and all of a sudden this dude who I assume was a roadie had the like cross, you know, like microphone, a backwards NASCAR hat, like a white wife beater, and like Adidas track pants. And I'm like, oh, it must be a roadie checking the mic. And then he hits the first note, and I'm like, holy shit, that's the King. That's the King. Yeah.
Out of makeup.
Out of makeup. I didn't, you know, in a NASCAR hat. I was so confused. I'm like, what is happening? But he was super cool to us. Like there was all this like, oh, you know, the King can be weird about people being around, but we didn't care. Like we just were like not rock starring out on them. You know, we weren't like, you know, oh, it's the King.
Right.
And so he was just like, oh, these dudes are cool. Like it's fine. You know, like, so, and they were great to us. That's awesome. But it was such a joke, you know, and then the next thing we did after that was with Glassjaw. So we're like, we went from a death metal tour to King Diamond to like Glassjaw.
That's crazy.
We're like, all right, we can play with anyone. You know, that was kind of the beginning of it. We're like, we fit in anywhere. We're like, whatever crowd you put us in front of, we're just going to do exactly what we do and just try and kick ass. Like that was it.
Yeah. So. You find that like more, I mean, nowadays I feel like festivals are definitely way more mixed. And I think it's just a testament to like younger people are more open to having, you know, metal, hip hop, jam bands, you know.
Totally, man. Like, especially some of these big ones, some of these Dan Wimmer ones we've been doing, like, you know, whether it's like Sonic Temple or like, you know, like Welcome to Rockville, it's all over the place, man.
Yeah. It's crazy,
the Sonic Temple, this stage had like Suicidal Tendencies, Converge, Mastodon, ICP, Death Heaven, all on the same, you know, on the same stage in a row. It was madness. It was awesome.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's pretty random when you see some of these festival lineups, you know.
So yeah, it's like Cannibal Corpse and then Ice-T. You're like, yep, sure, that works. You know, like, you know, do it.
And do you find a lot of the bigger artists that you've played with are most of them pretty cool with you guys, like King Diamond?
Yeah, you know, for the most part, we've been pretty lucky where we've played some bigger, you know, like some bigger tours, whether it's Ozfest type stuff or like Slipknot, like arena tour, things like that. And everyone's been super cool, but because most of it is if you're just cool and handling your business, everyone's cool, man. You know, and honestly, a lot of times you find out that these dudes are into like similar stuff or came from places you didn't expect too. You know, like like, or, you know, grew up either playing in hardcore bands or playing in punk bands and just, you know, kind of get it.
Yeah.
But we've been super lucky where we've gotten some crazy opportunities, and every time we would try and make the most of it and be like, dude, we're just going to bring what we can, you know, like, but back in the day, if you'd have told me we would do a tour, like Ozfest 2005 was headlined by Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden. And like, we're literally on the same stage every night,
right,
with Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden. I'm like, that just didn't seem possible.
Yeah, 14-year-old you would be like, what?
Oh, just losing my mind. So, and even that was the thing. I was losing my mind then, because like we'd be in the dressing room and all of a sudden Nico McBrain just pops in like, hey, can I grab a beer real quick? Like, you can have whatever you want, dude.
Buddy,
like, you know, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were super lucky, and it showed you what it proved to us too is we always said in the early days, and we didn't know if it was true, but we always said like, hey man, you put us in front of an Ozfest crowd or in front of like, you know, these new metal kids or whatever it is, we'll kick ass. Like, we don't care. We'll do it. And then we got to actually prove that. And so it was cool knowing that sticking to what we did and not kind of changing to what was happening actually worked out. Because when we first started, man, guitar solos were just, you know, not the thing.
Right.
You know, it was very much a new metal like world in the early 2000s when we were kind of coming up. And we saw a very drastic change on Ozfest 2003. Mm-hmm. The second stage was like us, Killswitch Engage, Chimera, Sworn Enemy, Cradle of Filth, like all these like underground kind of bands. Yeah. And then half new metal bands. Right. Whereas the year before had been all new metal bands. By the end of that tour, half of those new metal bands even broke up or realized like, wow, it's over.
Yeah.
You know, like,
this scene is,
And then the next year, the second stage was all bands like us, you know, and then by 2005, bands like Us and In Flames were on the main stage, you know. So it was just like we watched the shift.
Yeah, because you're not following a trend. You guys are just you do what you do, and
we stuck to our guns and let everyone else catch up. It was like, dude, we're like, they won't let us in the back door, so we're gonna kick the back door down.
Yeah, exactly.
And now they can't you know, like say anything, you know, like and all the numbers were there. It's like, dude, we're on Century Media Records selling 250,000 copies of an album, and you know, all these other labels are like, how the fuck? That's not how this works, you know? Yeah.
So, I think that's just a lot of bands from this scene. That's how you do it, you know. On Earth, you know, they just worked and did their thing.
And that is the key, I think, for this style of music. The live show is what really carries it over. Yeah. And you see bands, especially Unearth, I don't think they've ever gone home. Like,
I know, right?
And it's insane. They're still like doing band tours where they just don't give a shit. They're like, nope, we just want to play. We don't stop.
Yeah, I know.
Madness, man. Those dudes are workers.
Yeah, and you guys got nominated for a Grammy at one point.
Yeah, which that was a pretty big shock. You know, like we knew, you know, the album had been successful, but like that didn't seem like on the radar.
Right.
And it's funny. So we get the nomination. We're like, and we look at the thing. We're like, we're not going to win. Like, we know that.
Who are you up against?
We were up against Slipknot. It might have been King Diamond as well. I forget who else. And but Slipknot had been nominated, I think, twice already and not won. So we're like, all right, they're definitely going to win. Yeah. And but so we get there, and of course, none of us know how this stuff works. You know, like we've never been to anything like this. So you get there early. And we realized that our awards is like in a separate building from the forum that's not being televised, you know, like, and it basically is set up like a gym, like, you know, like awards thing at high school where we're all these folding chairs, and they just call you up. Yeah. And we also realized right away, like when we first walked in, there was a little bit of champagne. There was some food out on this outside area. And as soon as the ceremony started, they took all that away. Yeah. And we're like, oh, okay, well, that's weird. And then you go to the forum for the actual televised thing, and there's no food, no drinks, no anything. We've been there now for like 4 or 5 hours, starving, you know, like just want a beer. And you can't leave your seat during the televised thing because they need seat fillers and all this shit. Yeah. And it was crazy. So like, I think we're like halfway through the ceremony, and we just all get a text from like our manager at the time, like, I'll buy Mexican food for anyone who wants to leave right now. We're all like, yep, we're out, you know? Right. So we bounced pretty early from the actual Grammys, like televised thing. We hit all the parties afterwards. Right, you know, right. That's where it's at. We're, you know, we're not going to miss those, but But it was pretty funny. And then we ended up 2 years later getting nominated again.
Yeah.
And we looked at the thing and it was like Slayer and Motorhead. We're like, all right, well, we're not winning again either. But it was, at least that time we were prepared. We knew how this works.
Right.
We were, knew to pregame. We knew to eat,
Yeah.
And that one actually had a Morris Day in the Time reunion. So that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Nice. So you stayed for that.
We stayed for that. And we still left early. We still left early.
Yeah, of course.
Once it was Brad Paisley was doing Check Me for Ticks, I was like, it's time to get the fuck out.
Get the fuck out of here. And so you guys took a hiatus in 2014. And now you've been kind of playing shows sporadically the last few years, like here and there, like short runs or festivals or.
Yeah, pretty much. Like we had been on the road for about 20 years straight, maybe a little bit less, but really about almost 2 decades. And I was burnt. I was burnt out. Yeah. We weren't, things had kind of also plateaued where we knew we could stay out on the road, but it was getting harder to justify when you're I just had my first kid and I missed a lot that first year. I was on the road for probably 10 months out of her first year on the planet, and missed a lot. And then once John got the opportunity to join Anthrax, and he was trying to split time between both. Right. And then I had my son, my second kid, and I was like, you know what, I need to be home. Paul, our bass player, had his first kid, and also financially, I was like, I can't justify. We could have survived, but I would have been gone the whole time. So it's one thing if you're like, this is our best opportunity, right. But if you're just kind of making ends meet and you're absentee, I was like, I couldn't justify it at the time, and I was mentally, physically just burnt on the road. Couldn't get back on the tour bus or in a van. I was just like, I just need time. So I need to sit and not go 65 miles per hour while I sleep.
Exactly.
So we decided to kind of take some time off and see where it went. And and everyone was able to do some really cool things. Like I said, John was in Anthrax. Jason was playing with, I think, first Flotsam and Jetsam, and then he was in Overkill. And Matt started a band with some of the guys who were in Megadeth for a while. So everyone was getting to kind of do some cool stuff. I was doing just smaller little fun things
Death
musically. Death Ray Vision with Mike. So I got to get back with the Overcast dudes with Mike and Pete and do that. And but on a just on kind of a once again for fun level of it. There was no music business behind it. That was the other thing. Shadows Fall was at that point, 3 LLCs and all this different stuff. And it's everything's you couldn't make a decision that didn't have a bottom line to it, because it was our full-time job. It was a business. So it was good, nice to get away from that. So then after a while, we were kind of all sort of talking. We're like, it'd be fun to play a show. Maybe we'll do something, maybe a Worcester show or something like that. And the ball started rolling, and promoters were like, yes, let's do this. And then COVID hit. And so we had it booked but not announced, thankfully. And then realized we gotta all right, that's gonna be at least a year, so the world shut down. But then we came back and did that first reunion show in Worcester, and it was so much fun. And we just felt really blessed, and the fact that people still cared. And just had an amazing time. And from there we're like, all right, let's maybe do a couple shows here and there. We got a couple festival offers, and that started that. And then we started talking about new music, and John's like, I got just riffs upon riffs in the bank, so let's see what's what. Because the whole thing with that, I was like, I'm down to do that, but it's got to sound like Shadows Fall. We can't, let's make sure it's us. And man, the first few tunes that came out were like, oh man, this is this is gonna work. So now we're just at a point where we're kind of picking and choosing our battles show wise. We just did a 2-week run with Killswitch Engage that was perfect. The perfect amount of time, perfect lineup, so much fun. The shows are all killer.
Look like you guys were killing it.
We were having a blast, and the Killswitch dudes are like family, so that was
of course,
easy. And then we got a big show in Massachusetts coming up with Lamb of God and Hatebreed. So and some of the festivals we played have just been incredible, man. The U.S. festivals didn't exist like this when we were active. You had to go to Europe, stuff like that. So now that there's these U.S. festivals, we can play in front of so many people in just like a weekend.
Yeah.
Without having to do a full tour, because I don't think we'll ever be we'll never be a full-time touring band again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't even know if we'll do like full tours.
Right. Right.
We may do a couple weeks here and there, long weekends and stuff.
Yeah.
But I just don't know if that's in the cards. It would be fun, but it'd be hard to pull off. So.
Yeah.
So, and now we're just focused on getting some new music out there and just kind of seeing where things go.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. It sounds like you guys are doing it at your own speed. And it seems like a lot of bands end up at that point where at some point you need to slow down a little and just kind of, especially if you're starting families or you're all in different parts of the country, it's a little harder, I imagine.
That's the other thing. People living all over different parts, having families, but also just, I want to be able to, I don't want to like have these shows be like, oh yeah, I remember these guys. They used to have energy,
Right,
I want to go out there and still be able to kick ass. And if I did a 6-week tour, there's no way that would be happening at the end of it.
You're not going to be like those Frankie Valli videos. Have you seen them?
Totally, man. That's and plus my neck at 50 years old is like, easy on that.
Buddy.
Yeah. So, but it's been great. Also, even just making new music, the way the industry's changed with being able to release things kind of not on album cycles.
Right.
The way it used to be. Before it was drop a full length, tour for a year and a half, drop a full length, tour for a year and a half. Now you can just kind of, we've been dropping a single here and there, and then now we're going to finish the full record and put it all out. Nice. And it's just such a different way. Physical media outside of vinyl doesn't even really matter. So it's just a different thing. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's a whole.
We've been able to kind of just do it at our own pace. So.
Yeah, nice. And so here's something I was hoping to talk a bit about. So you and I have a something in common where we're both from this hardcore metal scene, but we're also fans of the Grateful Dead and Phish.
Yes, indeed.
So how did you make it to? Were you into them early on?
It's funny. Phish. The first time I heard Phish, my friend played me Contact, and I was like, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life." Like, and I didn't make it to the funk jam at the end of it, and all that. All I heard was the nursery rhyme style Mike Gordon talking about his car and touching the road, and I was like, nope. I was like, because they were all like, dude, you'll have so much fun at these shows. You're gonna go. I was like, dude, I'm going to see Rorschach, and 126 band. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. And it's funny too. Also with the Dead, I had heard some of the like American Beauty and like Working Man's Dead hits. I was like, these are great songwriters, but I didn't know too much. And then in '93, I'd heard a few bootlegs before that and was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. There's this whole other side of this that I didn't realize. Right. And a level of musicianship that I was just blown away. Yeah. And I was also getting into more progressive music in general. Started listening to like a little more prog rock, a little more jazz fusion. Yeah. And then, man, I went to the '93 run at Boston Garden, hit every show, and was like, all in. I was all in. Yeah. And from there, I went down to MSG and did that run. Yeah. And then I tried to hit any show I could. Yeah. On top of that, I saw the first Phish show I saw was at the Mullen Center in UMass. Oh yeah. And they destroyed. Yeah. And I mean, it also had like Big Black Furry Creatures from Mars. So there's a little bit of punk rock to it, And then they became, that was all I listened to for like a few years. That was it. Yeah. I dove deep in. And since then I've seen at least a couple shows every single year besides when they took their hiatus. Yeah. Since '93, there's been a year that I haven't at least seen one show, if not more. Yeah. But like '95 to '98, I was not on tour the whole time, but I was definitely doing weeks of shows.
Yeah, same here. And that was '95 and '97 are the two of my favorite years, and '98. '98's underrated, I think.
Very underrated. '95. See, what I liked about the early days, because I was really into the composed stuff. Yeah. And just their tightness at first. Yeah. And then, dude, '97, like once the funk hit and things just got weird. Yeah. And just the psychedelic soundscapes. Because I was also getting really into shoegazy stuff like Spiritualized and My Bloody Valentine. So once they started swirling around, it was over. And then, the Island tour happened in '98. And it was just
that was one of my favorite. This is my favorite run, I think.
Yeah. That was about as good as it gets. My favorite memory of Phish will always be Big Cypress, just because nothing like that will ever happen. Yeah, I know. Just a full 12-hour show or whatever.
Yeah.
And but the island tour, I'm so glad I saw all those shows. Like that was as good as it gets.
Yeah.
So man, but what's crazy is to still to this day having a band that's in their, you know, whatever 40th year still creating new sounds live.
Yeah, it's
like
crazy, right?
The run they did here in St. Louis on this last tour, there were moments in the Tweezer Jam where I'm like, this is the greatest band on earth. Like they're communicating with aliens.
Still,
I'm like,
it's crazy, right?
Still making new sounds, and I don't understand how. It's incredible. Like it's inspiring. So
I listened to on my ride home from work today. I listened to Runaway Jim from Summer '98 in Pittsburgh, Star Lake. It's like a 35-minute. But I think I did like a 5-show run in that summer of '98. And I saw when they did the Terrapin Encore.
Oh, you were there! Oh my God,
Virginia Beach. But I did miss Big Cypress. I missed them kicking myself.
Big Cypress was incredible. But I would have killed to have seen that Terrapin. Their tour manager Brad Sands was telling the story where they had been talking about it and he knew what was happening in their like little practice space, but he's just like, I can't believe this is really going to happen. But then he says the show's going on. All of a sudden he's like, dude, we're hitting curfew and they haven't done it. Like, what? And then he's like, they started anyway. They're like, we're losing money. It's fine. Like they just play Terrapin.
I was actually by myself at that show. And I think that was the last of that run that I was going to see. And I think I was going to drive up to, that was when they did the Syracuse thing, maybe up in, it was one of those outdoor festivals, but it wasn't like a festival. It was just like one of those 2-night things. I think it was '98. But I was by myself and I was just tired. And right when they got off stage, I started walking. And then I heard the opening of Terrapin. I'm like, nope. Went right back. I was like, thank God I didn't. I know. I was like, thank God I didn't. I would have.
Yeah, that would have been a tough one to have been on the outside for.
Yeah, I would have had to lie forever. Been like, oh yeah, that was great. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. That's awesome. But yeah, it was a bummer you missed Big Cypress, man. There was nothing I've ever will experience like that. Like, honestly, my brain couldn't handle it again. I'm shocked that I didn't wander off into the swamp somewhere eaten by an alligator. But man, I would go back and listen to the sand from that night.
Yeah.
And it's just like the most pulsing, like crazy.
That's probably my favorite thing on there. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. The Mike song, I remember they all of a sudden released more smoke than I've ever seen. And there was this stuff going around called the mystery green dust that to this day, no one knows exactly what it was.
Right.
And all of a sudden I'm, starting to drift off into space and I'm staring at the screen at the stage. And I swear it turns into a giant mechanical spider in the red lights and it starts coming towards me. And I just started backing up. Like I couldn't look away, but I just started like physically just like retreating, And so I always remember that from that jam, man. Oof. What a band.
Do you, when you're with your bands, do you try to get people into
I tried in the early days, especially with Phish, because I was like, no, your guys are all guitar dudes. You can get into this, and like it very rarely stuck.
It's a tough sell for a lot of people.
I have a crew of like metalhead Phish dudes who were like in the Overcast like world, at that time, but were like my friends, and we all still like we're actually all meeting up this summer for shows. We still like get together all the time. We usually do Dicks out in Colorado together, or fly home for the MSG New Year's run still. Yeah. And it's funny because like we all show up like, I'll have my like Integrity like tie-dyed hoodie and like, and like, it's just a bunch of hardcore kids like who also love Phish. Yeah. And half of it was because we're like, dude, we love hardcore shows, but like, the straight edge kids don't have as good a herb as the ones in the Phish show.
I know. I remember driving into the IT Festival. And I was with one of my best friends is Buzz's brother Sean, and him and I went up to that, and we listened to like Warzone at pulling up the parking lot, and I'm like,
that was always the move, man.
Yeah, we were like, we're the only people in this entire place guaranteed that are listening to Warzone right now. He's like,
100%, dude. That was always our thing too, man. When we pulled into Cyprus, we were cranking Iced Earth, and it was the Alive in Athens record. Yeah. And so we park and we roll down the windows. We're cranking it up. We're like, yeah, you guys are gonna have to deal with the metal. And then the battery died in the car. And we're like, that's karma,
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like people in that scene too, the jam band scene, can be a little more open with different genres of music too.
Totally.
They're either that or they can be judgmental of like punk and stuff because it's not.
Well, they may think it's too simple. They think it's caveman music sometimes until they hear like some of the real stuff. Because what's really funny especially with like 90s sort of like more melodic hardcore, like Verbal Salty type stuff. Those riffs would fit in with early 90s Phish,
Yeah.
like in a phone
Yeah.
jam,
Yeah.
like no problem.
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
there is a lot of that, but and it's funny, you play like, you know, and some of even the band, like a band like Humphrey McGee's, they'll
Yeah.
straight up do like progressive
Yeah, they do
metal,
some crazy
double
stuff.
bass and everything,
Yeah.
and, you know,
Yeah.
sweep picking and all that.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that. And even, you know, now Billy Strings is playing on Cryptopsy Records and sitting in with, you know, Tool and stuff. So
I know, it's crazy.
it's definitely at least a little more open, as opposed to, you like I said, you know, you play like, oh, check out the sick Ghost Jam to some death metal dude, and they're like, nah,
I know.
like, nah.
I know. I've yeah, because I've always thought of like what would be a good Dead song or Phish song to like suck someone in or trick them into, you know. I think it's easier with the older Dead, like the American Beauty guy.
Yeah, so the songwriting again, but then also even the Primal Dead, you play them like the 11 or something, and they can at least hear like, oh, these dudes are just ripping and going crazy.
Yeah.
But then, you know, it's usually half the time. Also, the vocals will come in and they're just like, and that's where that's when they tap out. You know.
Yeah. Phish. I think I played "What's the Use" for a friend by Phish, and he was like, "Wow, this is cool." He's like, "Is this Sonic Youth?" And I was like, "Nope, it's Phish."
Nope, it's Phish.
Yeah, he's like, "God damn it,
yeah, you got me. You got me.
You got me.
Yeah, you got me." That's again an instrumental, you know.
Yeah, and
I love that song live, man. Oh my god, the feels.
Yeah. And I think that's where you gotta get people in is the jams, because I think a lot of people think it's just noodling guitar solos, and I'm always thinking that's more like the Allman Brothers or even the Dead, to a point where like the Dead kind of got spacey, but you know, Phish made these created
soundscapes, man. Yeah, they create stuff on the fly. They also create riffs and like that.
Yeah,
there's like, what was it there? The Ruby Waves from like Alpine Valley that they put out on vinyl recently. Like there's a full Sabbath section of the jam.
Yeah.
And then it goes right into like dub reggae, you know, like so smooth.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one of the tweezers from like Salem, Oregon, like, I think it was like 94. There's a full, it sounds like 3 Days by Jane's Addiction, like 100%.
Yeah.
And like those moments you can get them in.
Yeah.
But then the next song will be like, literally like, you know, like
Contact
or something. And then they're just like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. You know, like I get it.
Yeah. The Worcester show, 11/30/97 was another one of those that got like real heavy. And that was one of those where
Dude, Evil Phish, man, that was the thing for a while, man. They would put on the red lights and they'd get discordant and evil, and I would see all the deadheads who hopped over after Jerry died, who were just looking to party, were like, what's going on, man?
Yeah, it was a different vibe. I saw the one of the first. I started seeing them in '90, but I think the first time I saw them do something crazy was in Providence, the David Bowie in '94, which was pretty. And then that thing got like. That's where he's doing that Lassie, like thing in the middle
insane.
Of it. But that was one of those first times where I like left my, you know, might have, it wasn't just the music that was doing that to me, but I definitely left my body and was like watching I felt like I was watching me watching the show. You know, I'm sure.
That's amazing, man. I always used to joke around. I was like, think about it. They got you locked in an arena. They're using pinging surround sound delay while they're telling you you're never going to have this maze while just ripping the rip. You know, I'm like, that's evil.
I know. The people like tripping really hard. I always was like, oh, you're having fun.
It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Awesome
stuff. Awesome. And you take that sort of spirit of just that fun it shows to how you perform, I imagine.
100%, man.
Different vibe, but you know how that energy is. It's the same.
But I'm always smiling on stage because I'm like, this is the funnest thing ever. I'm always trying to connect with the audience that way, like, because like it should be a party, man. Like you know, like we don't play shows, we throw parties, and like that's the way. But I came up in that scene where that's what it was about, you know, and I'll always like have that, you know. Granted, you know, like we're playing some punishing, brutal stuff at times, but you know, like I'm always trying to bring some sort of positivity to it as well, you know.
Yeah That's awesome, man.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, man. This has been fun. I'm glad to chat with you finally.
Indeed, man, as well. So see, us metal hippies got to stick together, you know. Like,
I know. We'll have to trick more people into are you hitting any of these shows coming up?
This has been a tough year. I'm trying to figure
Yeah.
out because whenever the ones that are close, I'm either playing a show or have something.
Yeah.
So I was, but I'm going to try and hit Chicago. I may try and hit Boulder.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's gonna be this year will be tough. This year will be tough.
Yeah. I don't
When
think
in doubt, I'll always just be like, please just announce MSG New Year's, and I'll just go there and meet up with
I
my
know.
friends. You know.
I know.
So,
I really want to go to Hampton, but I don't think I can do it this year.
I know. Same.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, man. Well, you have a good night, and I will talk to you soon.
Sounds good, brother. Thanks for doing it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Cheers.
Later.